Yeah, that whole interview will be aired on Saturday. Now, EU leaders have slammed Moscow's demand that, quote, unfriendly states use the Russian currency to pay for their gas imports. Objecting to Vladimir Putin's request, they say the move would breach existing supply contracts. I talked through the story with RT's Paula Sleer earlier.
Well, the reaction is to be expected. We heard from the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz basically refusing and saying that they would not be paying for Russian gas deliveries in the Russian currency. He was speaking yesterday at the G7 conference in Brussels, where he said there are fixed contracts in place and that those contracts are paid in euros and in dollars. The same kind of sentiments being expressed by Poland's state energy company, saying that they won't pay in rubles, but actually saying that they can't pay in rubles. Also stressing that there are contracts in place and one person cannot unilaterally go ahead and break those contracts according to his will. So we've seen across the EU leaders basically saying that this is a breach of contract, and at the same time, quite a few of them scoffed at the mention of so-called unfriendly countries.
This would be a unilateral decision and a clear breach of contract, and it would be an attempt to circumvent the sanctions. We will not allow our sanctions to be circumvented. The time when energy could be used to blackmail us is over.
This is basically a breach of contract. This is important to understand.
I don't think anybody in Europe really knows how rubles look like. Nobody will pay in rubles.
Well, we've just heard it there, Paul. Some claiming it's a breach of contract by Moscow, but the EU, it has to be said, on an unprecedented scale, has frozen Russian assets, including foreign reserves, which by right is owned by the Russian people. So are they wanting it both ways here?
Well, that's exactly the point. I mean, as you correctly say, we've seen, for example, in France, they've frozen the Russian central bank's assets to the tune of 22 billion euros. They've also frozen private property belonging to about 30 Russian individuals. That's to the tune of half a billion euros. And in the Netherlands, they've also frozen their Russian assets and Russian transactions, and that's to the tune of 392 million euros. And that was as of March the 21st, as specified in a letter that was given from the Dutch Finance Ministry to the government. So there certainly is some kind of double standards and a sense that what is good for the goose is not good for the gander.
The ruble as well seems to be regaining ground. I think a lot of people checking that every day on the back of the president's demand after some extraordinary fluctuations in the past few weeks. Can you just briefly touch on that?
Sure. Well, the ruble briefly leapt to a three-week high against past 95 against the dollar. At the same time, it pared gains but stayed well below 100, coming in at about 97.7 against the dollar. And what we have seen is that since February the 24th, the ruble has actually gone down by more than 22%. So essentially what you have is the Russian president saying, and his message is quite clear, you want our gas, you'll pay for it in our currency. But what is not yet clear is whether he can unilaterally do this with contracts that have already been signed in euros and in dollars.
Well, let's go live now to Hanover, Germany, and speak to Dr. Anke Hammer, economist and publisher of the Wirtschaft Aktuell newsletter. You're very welcome. The Kremlin says it's expecting Europe to work out its position on Vladimir Putin's request on the new payment mechanism. The EU doesn't appear to even want to try. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think the EU was totally caught on the wrong foot by this measurement. They thought everybody wants the euro, everybody wants the dollar, and they couldn't imagine that Russia does this masterpiece of a move by telling them, okay, your credit card does not work anymore, because paying as a client in his own currency is like using a credit card where you can decide whether you pay or you don't. And Russia said, no, I don't accept this anymore, because they had no other option. The Europeans and the US froze their assets, foreign assets. So they said, well, what is it worth to have euros if we can't use them in an emergency? So the first one who broke the international agreement of, or not the agreement, but the unspoken agreement of a reserve currency were the US and the Europeans. So this is just logic that Russia says, okay, if I can't use these currencies anymore, it doesn't make any sense for me to deliver my gas and my oil for free, for nothing, for something I can't use anymore.
What scenario are we likely to see in the event of the EU refusing to use the ruble for gas payments?
Well, it's the client. He needs the gas and they need the oil, so they are sort of stuck. Of course, they are complaining and they try anything to do. But even if Russia would stick to the remaining contracts in euros and immediately change the euros and the dollars into ruble again on the international markets or into gold, it is all the same by saying them you have to pay get the rubles and exchange it into euros. But I think what is changing now is that it is a power shift. It's a power shift away from the unilateral US dollar hegemony to a more multipolar hegemony where Russia and China will be a partner on the same side. And the one who has a bigger trade deficit is the loser out of this game. And everybody can see in his own country whether he belongs to the losers or the winners.
Yeah, in terms of the response, European politicians, as you know, they've been scrambling to reduce reliance on Russian energy. We know a new task force has been announced by the bloc together with Washington this Friday. Will that be a success, do you think?
No, of course not. What they do is they're crashing the German Mittelstand, they are crashing the American Mittelstand, and they crash the British Mittelstand. This is a so-called Great Reset program from Klaus Schwab and his oligarchs gang. And don't forget that all the important politicians in Germany, the heads of the main parties, are all part of this oligarch program from Klaus Schwab, the Young Global Fellow Leader program. So they are just puppets from the US and from Klaus Schwab and his gang. So they have no chance. We need the oil, we need the gas if we want to keep the economy running. Otherwise, the economy is declining. So easy.
Yeah, I am aware that when we talk like this, it's sometimes on a macro level, but of course, this is going to affect people in society working, generally the poorest as well. Russia is Europe's largest supplier of diesel and other fuels. That's as the EU, of course, faces diesel and gas shortages. Just can you enlighten us as to how these sanctions could play out for ordinary Europeans? They're coming from Europe to affect Russia, but there could be a blowback.
Yes, for the ordinary, it will be very expensive now. So we could face that diesel or gasoline would cost 4 or 5 or 6 euros on the liter. And we could face that most people can't afford a car anymore in Europe. So the great and wealthy West is a hoax without this. And people, of course, will make the politicians responsible for this, because the entire fight or the entire controversy with Russia is made without any reason. And Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, made it pretty clear, and he had a much more harmonious searching politics, even though he seemed to be very hard to the outside. But in this sense, the loser will be the German Mittelstand and the poor people in Germany, in Europe, and in the US. And if the German economy goes down by these measurements, entire Europe will fall apart.
Just a word or two, if you will, on the ruble itself. It's strengthened its position on world markets amid Vladimir Putin's request for payments in the currency. We saw that over the last few days after wild fluctuations. How likely do you think the trend is going to continue, that the ruble will stay noticeably stronger than it did?
If the central bank and the responsible people are smart, they will strengthen even further the ruble. Why? Because strengthening the ruble will make the ruble for reserve currency, and they will be benefiting from the windfall profits of a reserve currency. The US has benefiting from the windfall profits of a reserve currency for the last 70 years, and that's basically the big bubble they were able to expanding and gaining control over most of the economies in the other countries outside US, because everybody needed the dollars and or wanted the dollars, and was able to gave up their own economy against dollars. And now the ruble has the same chance. So if the central bank is smart, they will even strengthen the ruble further, just like the Swiss National Bank did it. But on the other hand, it is a bit more challenging, the work of the Russian central bank, because now they have to manage more interest within Russia and outside Russia, and it's just a bit more challenging. But the profit of it and the benefit for the people is tremendous.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the programme and sharing your thoughts on all that with us. We always appreciate it. Dr. Anke Hammer, economist and publisher, live from Hamburg today.
Thank you. Welcome.